The Armada Police Department is looking for a phone, but it's not just any phone. It's the phone of a missing teenage girl. April Millsap went out for a 1-hour walk with her dog, but 2 hours in, she still hadn't come home. Detectives retraced her steps, but they didn't find one single piece of evidence, and April's phone was their only hope of finding out where she ended up. That's because she had sent a chilling text to her boyfriend just minutes before she disappeared, telling him that she had narrowly escaped the clutches of a kidnapper. But the truth is, for the kidnapper, it seems like everything was going according to plan. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week, narrated by a real human person. So if that's your kind of thing, be sure to hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all my future cases. April Millsap was the only child of Jennifer and Bobby Millsap, and she was born in Armada, Michigan, which is a small rural town with a population of less than 2,000 people. It's literally the textbook definition of a small town where everyone knows everyone. Now, I'm sure you've heard this a lot in these true crime cases. So-and-so lived in a small town where everyone knew each other. But a lot of times, that idea is a bit overblown. But Armada is literally a small town where people knew all their neighbors and their neighbors' neighbors and so on. To prove this, the town's detectives knew April by name and face because they saw her at the school bus stop while dropping their kids off almost every single day. That's how close-knit this community was. Because there was little to no crime in Armada, people generally thought that they were safe, and they didn't need to install an army of security cameras or even lock their doors, which isn't exactly a good idea, but it is what it is. The crime rate was low, almost non-existent, to the point where the Armada Police Department only had a couple of officers on duty each day. To top things off, they didn't have a lot of experience in solving crimes or homicides because they never really happened here. It was a safe place where kids and adults alike could take a stroll at any time of day without a blip of worry in their minds. It was a type of utopia. Almost. April was defined as a kind and independent young girl, even though she was only a teen at the time of the case. She loved animals and wanted to become a vet when she grew up. Her parents had split when April was young, but she had a great relationship with both of her step-parents too, and the whole family hung out all the time. April also had a boyfriend at the time named Austin, and the two went to the same school and had been dating for about a year at that point. Their relationship was quite serious as far as teen relationships go, and they had a legitimate chance of being in it for the long haul. I mean, me and my wife met when we were that age, so things like that can certainly still happen, even in this day and age. All that said, April was living her quiet, peaceful, and very content life in the homey town of Armada. But one fateful day, in July of 2014, everything would change, and it would all start with one very eerie text message. July 24th of 2014 was a summer break for April, and she decided to take her dog Penny out for a walk at about 6 p.m. that day. This wasn't unusual for April. She often walked Penny in the evening, and sometimes her boyfriend Austin would go with her, or her parents would join her too. Her walking route was also familiar, and it took her around an hour to walk her dog. It wasn't like she was taking a completely different or unfamiliar route from usual, so she wasn't going to get lost or anything like that. She knew the trail like it was her own backyard, so there was nothing to worry about. Or so it seemed. An hour passed by, then another 30 minutes went by, and then it was nearing 2 hours, but April hadn't made it home. Her mom, Jennifer, who actually suffers from a neurological disorder that impairs her speech and movement and whatnot, started to get really worried, but not to the point where she scrambled to call the police. She first decided to call April's friends and then her boyfriend, Austin. Jennifer thought that maybe April had made plans at the last minute and she forgot to inform her parents in the flurry of the activity. Maybe that was why she was running late, and Jennifer was worrying over nothing. Jennifer was trying everything to reason with her worry. It never even crossed her mind that something bad would have happened to her daughter. Things like that just didn't happen here. True crime documentaries like this may as well have been fiction to the residents of that small town because the idea of violent crime, it was just such a foreign concept. Well, sadly, Jennifer's worry and fear only grew when April's friends, as well as Austin, informed her they hadn't seen her either. Austin even visited the Millsap home to comfort Jennifer, who was nearly losing her mind by this point. April would never just disappear off the radar like this. So where was she? Well, when Austin checked his phone, he almost stopped breathing. April had sent him a text at about 6:30 p.m., a good chunk of time after she walked out the front door of her house to walk Penny. Her text, well, it was very unsettling. In the text, April said, "I think I almost got kidnapped." This was the moment when April's family and loved ones knew something was terribly wrong. Did April come across paths with someone dangerous? Did she really get abducted? Jennifer was scared of letting her mind wander off in dangerous places, but enough was enough. She called her husband David first, and then the police, and just like that, April Millsap was a missing person. Even though April was reported missing, and her family and friends were out looking for her, somewhere else, someone had called 911 after a disturbing and tragic discovery. By the time April's friends and family reached the route April took every day to walk Penny, they found the place already drowning in blue and red lights. Who placed the 911 call, and what did they discover? Well, let me take you a couple hours back after April failed to show up at home. A couple who were jogging on the same trail as April heard a noise in the otherwise quiet area. When they tried listening a bit harder, they knew what they were hearing. It was a dog. When the couple approached closer, they saw a black dog with a leash, but no owner, and it was very jumpy. The woman tried to calm the dog down and even tried to get a hold of its leash, but the dog ran from the joggers and led the couple to a dense bush. It was as if this poor dog was trying to ask for help. When the couple looked behind the bush, their walk took a very tragic and unsettling turn. In the dark, wooded area, the pale figure almost looked like a mannequin, but they knew their eyes weren't playing tricks on them. It wasn't a mannequin. It never is. It was a body, and from the looks of it, it looked like a teenage girl. The man immediately called 911, and the rest was a blur. The trail was crowded with detectives and police officers in no time, and since they already had a report on a missing April Millsap, things weren't looking good. Tragically, the body behind the bush, down in the ravine, was rather quickly identified as April. She was found barefoot, her clothes rumpled, and very clearly it looked like April struggled and fought for her life. There were defensive wounds on her body, as well as some weird marks on her face and neck. At first, the investigators were confused. These marks were weird, but when they looked a bit closer, it added a very dreadful layer to April's struggle and passing. These marks weren't ordinary violent crime marks, like slashes or abrasions. They were shoe prints. Someone had trampled April with all of their might. It was soul-crushing to think that such a small, petite young girl like April was getting attacked so viciously and in such a quiet and serene area. She almost certainly wouldn't have even had her guard up when the attack began. She was just out having a great, peaceful day and walking her dog, and now this. The autopsy revealed that April had sustained around 48 separate injuries, which is just insane. It definitely looked like someone had taken all of their anger out on April, and for a long time too. This attack would not have been quick by any means. Violence of this nature takes time. Even though the detectives suspected a perverse motive for the crime, April wasn't taken advantage of. This confirmed that April gave her assailant a tough time, and even though the murderer had nefarious intentions towards a defenseless teen girl, he wasn't successful in getting what he really wanted. But he was successful in taking her life in the end, and that is devastating. The Armada Police Department simply wasn't equipped to deal with a confusing crime like this. The town had maybe 2 or 3 officers on duty, so they knew that they needed experienced personnel on board to help solve this case, catch the perpetrator, and give April and her family justice and closure. But even though they knew that they were out of their depth, they still gave it their all. So the investigators first talked to April's family to get an idea of whether April had any enemies, a stalker or something like that. But soon, the detectives focused on Austin, her boyfriend. In most cases, the person closest to the victim is the most suspicious, and the fact that Austin received that text and didn't pay attention to it for a good chunk of time only made him more suspicious in the eyes of the police. Also, April and Austin had a bit of a falling out sometime before her murder, so the police were extra suspicious of him. But Austin had an airtight alibi. He was with a friend helping him with something, and then later the two were seen at a nearby McDonald's on CCTV. The boys were seen at about 6:30 p.m., which was the same time April had sent that text. But speaking of that text, it certainly is odd that Austin didn't really act on that message. He didn't even open the message or make any attempt to respond. Now, this is bizarre, at least until you know the full story. See, Armada, being a small town with hardly any local residents, didn't have the best cell service. It turns out when Austin was helping out his friend and later eating at a McDonald's, he didn't see the text because he never received it. While April is believed to have sent that text at 6:30 p.m., Austin didn't even have cell phone reception until a long time later, so he received that text a long time after April had sent it. In the end, Austin was let go because the detectives were sure he wasn't lying, and he was clearly not at the scene where April was attacked and murdered. So the investigators had no choice but to go back to the beginning and look for other clues or something that they missed. And it turned out they did miss something. April's phone. Where was it? They hoped that finding her phone would help give them a timeline of events so that they could better piece together this case. But little did they know, her phone was about to blow this case wide open and send someone to prison for life. It didn't take the police long at all to track down April's phone. In fact, it was about 1 kilometer or so away from the scene, and to the police, this was the jackpot. This was when forensic experts found a fitness app on the phone, and they decided to check it out. The app was your typical mobile health app. It measures your walking speed, heart rate, the steps you take, calories, and all that kind of stuff. They wanted to find even the slightest clue that could lead them to April's murderer, or any useful information. And luckily, they found it. See, at around 6:30 p.m., April's speed increased significantly on the app. This indicated that she was trying to lose her alleged kidnapper. The app, judging by the speed, indicated she was on foot, but she was either speed walking or running. But after some time, that speed increased even higher, to a point that was humanly impossible. April, even if she was running, couldn't have accelerated this quickly, unless she was in a vehicle. The speed matched that of a car or a motorcycle. It was very fast, and then it took a couple of minutes and all that movement stopped. So the detectives were finally able to conclude that the initial increased speed right after she sent that text to Austin was April on foot trying to run away from that mysterious person who approached her. Then the break in between was probably, and tragically, the time in which April was attacked, which the investigators concluded to be about 10 minutes. Afterward, the second time the app picked up speed was actually the assailant, and he had taken April's phone and was in a vehicle of sorts. And after a bit, he dumped the phone 1 kilometer away from the crime scene, which explains the sudden halt in movement altogether. Judging by the trail, the detectives thought that the assailant had to be on a motorcycle because the path was just too narrow for a car. Well, luck was on the police's side, because following the news of April's murder, a lot of people came into the police station, saying they had witnessed April walking side by side with a middle-aged man who had a motorcycle. The motorcycle was blue and white, and the man was on his feet, walking with April and pulling his motorcycle beside him. According to witnesses, April didn't seem afraid or shaken up, at least not when they saw her with that man. So the detectives finally had some sort of lead. They needed to track down this man and ask him a few questions, and in no time they managed to track him down. It was 3 days after April's body was discovered that the investigators pulled up in a neighborhood where the motorcycle was parked right outside. When the detectives talked to the homeowner, he said the motorcycle wasn't his, but his friend's. When the police asked him to elaborate, the man said that the motorcycle belonged to 32-year-old James Vancalis, who lived in Wales Township in St. Clair County. This was about 30 kilometers away from Armada. With that, the detectives made a beeline for Wales Township. Finding James Vancalis was easy, and he was brought into the police station for questioning very quickly. He was pretty cooperative during the investigation, but he claimed he had nothing to do with April's murder because he also had an alibi. See, according to James, he was with a friend at his house, but the detectives weren't buying his story. It wasn't a reliable alibi. James could have threatened or persuaded that friend to lie for all the investigators knew. So they decided to dig in for more information. They asked about James's shoes in hopes of finding the same pair that was used to stomp on young April. James gave all of his shoes to the police, but none of the marks matched the ones on April's body. The detectives were confused, but they still didn't let go of their suspicions. Why? Well, because James Van Callis had a criminal record. He wasn't convicted for violent crimes per se, but he did have a history of breaking into people's houses and not paying alimony. Also, when the police poked more into James's personal life, they found something very disturbing. James's dad, James Van Callis Sr., was a registered offender, and he had a history of harassing minors, and generally just being a disgusting excuse of a person. So the detectives were certain that the apple didn't fall far from the tree, and James Jr. definitely had a criminal streak, which possibly escalated in April's case. Even though James Sr. was no saint either, because he was literally a child predator, the investigators decided to hone in on the son because witnesses saw a middle-aged man with April, not some old Grams, so they knew that they were on to something. Ultimately, James Van Callis Sr. and Jr. were both arrested on illegal substance charges, but the main goal of this arrest was to gain a search warrant for the house. They wanted to search for those shoes. If they could find James Jr.'s shoes in the house, then this was a shut and done case. But the detectives were unsuccessful in finding the shoes or any trace of April's DNA in James's house. Even his motorcycle, which was checked and swabbed from top to bottom, had no foreign DNA on it. But it wasn't lost on the experts that the motorcycle was washed before it was taken in for evidence. And there was evidence that strong bleach or cleaning agents were used to wash the motorcycle clean. Even though the police were stuck at this point, someone came to their aid. It was none other than James Jr.'s girlfriend. Well, ex-girlfriend after all this went down. See, a woman claiming to be James's girlfriend went to the police station, and she remembered something very weird about James's behavior on the day April was murdered. She remembered seeing James coming home and asking for hand sanitizer. She then saw James cleaning his motorcycle, his helmet, and his black and white sneakers with that hand sanitizer. Now, this was where the investigators sat straight up. James never handed over a pair of black and white sneakers to them. James's girlfriend also explained that she never saw those shoes again after that evening. The detectives needed those shoes to pin him at the crime scene, and since he had disposed of them, the chances of reprimanding him for his crimes were getting slimmer and slimmer. That was until investigators stalked his social media, and in a lot of pictures, they saw James wearing the exact shoes that were now conveniently MIA. The police were eventually able to get their hands on an exact pair of those shoes. Obviously not James's, since he'd gotten rid of them somehow or another. But they wanted to match the shoe prints and markings on the shoes to those found on April's body. And lo and behold, once they acquired a pair, they were an exact match. To further confirm James's involvement, his phone's location showed that he was on the same trail at the same time of April's murder, and CCTV footage also showed the same white and blue motorcycle speeding down the road close to the route that April took. Even though James was careful and smart to not leave any DNA on April or at the crime scene, the detectives believed that the evidence they had on hand would be enough to charge him in April's murder. And that's exactly what happened. In October of 2014, James was officially arrested for the murder of April Millsap. James Van Callis Jr. was eventually charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and assault with intent to defile in April's case, and he pleaded not guilty to every charge, obviously. So the prosecution was the first to go with their arguments in the trial. The state believed that James had been eyeing a victim for a long time. His computer search history showed that he preferred teenage girls for his sick and twisted pleasure, and April was the perfect victim on that fateful day in July of 2014. She was alone, there was no one around, and he approached April with non-threatening intentions, or what he wanted April to believe, at least. When that plan went bust because April was obviously on a high alert and tried to get away from him, James savagely attacked April with his motorcycle helmet, overpowered her, and then took her life. The defense argued that James was being framed for a crime he didn't commit. There was no direct evidence to link him to the crime, and they claimed that the real perpetrator was someone else. The jury deliberated, and everyone was on edge for that final verdict. They were scared that James was going to get away with murder because he was smart enough to not leave any physical evidence like DNA. Well, the jury came back with the decision, and he was found guilty. James Van Callis Jr. murdered April Millsap, and it was calculated, intense, and callous. April had done nothing but protect herself from a creep, but in the end, she lost her life. Still to this day, James claims he had nothing to do with April's murder, but I think we all know better than that. April's mom, Jennifer, who was present at every court hearing, was relieved in the end. Her daughter's killer was finally behind bars, and even though he appealed right after his sentencing, he was kicked to the curb, and he'll most likely spend his entire life in prison. April's funeral was held on August 1st, 2014, and the community gathered to say their final goodbyes to an upbeat and bubbly young girl who had her whole life ahead of her. Pink ribbons were tied everywhere, on lampposts, utility poles, and trees, as well as on fences, leaving a small remembrance of April behind as she was laid to rest. Pink was April's favorite color, and this was the best way to remember her after she lost her life so suddenly and needlessly. I want to talk about April's beloved dog, Penny, too. She was right by her side until that last moment. It's possible that because of Penny, the monster preying on April had a hard time carrying out what he had originally intended to do. Penny was with April, her best friend, even after she lost her life. And it was because of Penny that April's body was found so quickly, and the detectives were able to get to work. If it weren't for Penny, there's a very solid chance April may never have been found. Penny was truly April's best friend in every way, and in the end, she was her family's saving grace, as without her, this case would have never been solved. But thanks to her, this disgusting man is now locked away, never to hurt anyone again. Penny has long since passed away, but her efforts to not only save her best friend, but also help someone find her body, they will not be soon forgotten. April's mom, Jennifer, will never be the same. She never thought in her wildest dreams that April would be taken away from her, a girl so kind and so generous, but she was. And that's why we've got to hold the people we care about closer and closer with every passing day, because you never know if today might be your last chance. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Sandy May and Pam. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. And it's a great way to support the channel and help out. And I really appreciate all of you guys that have decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video or find a link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available. You can grab one of those from a link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered. And don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.